there's the Biden administration and there's news of a coalition of democracies. India's a democracy. So is this going to help us? How do you see all this unfolding, and how will it affect us in India?
Well, I think in the departure from the Trump administration, which seemed to make cozy with authoritarian regimes, Biden wants to reassert the U.S. as the leader of a pack of democracies, or at least primus inter pares in the set of democracies. And it also is a natural sort of coalition to, let's say, deal with China, to try and find a new modus vivendi with China. And that's really what the Biden administration has in mind. And in this coalition, naturally, Japan and Europe will fit in. But what other countries do they bring in? Now, in the past, it would be natural for India to be part of this coalition because, it's the world's largest democracy. And certainly in the Quad sort of structure where India, Australia, Japan, the US sort of come together, those are examples of structures in which, India is present. But I think there is also a worry when you start talking about democracies today. There's a question mark on India in the certainly in foreign dialogues, which I think is really, I think, perhaps overstating what is happening in India, but also very worrisome because of the trend.
It's important that you mention it, but how widespread is this global concern and apprehension about India's democracy? And how important is democracy for even our economic growth? Do you see a connection between democracy and our growth rates?
When you see India's democratic bona fides being questioned elsewhere, for sure, our natural reaction is these guys don't know what they're talking about, and India is strong and vibrant. But we also know when sitting in India that there is less room for free debate and free discussion than there used to be. And so the question is, how do we remedy this? How do we, because I think, go back to our medium-term growth. Our medium-term growth, remember, we're not a manufacturing power. We are more a service power. It is going to be in the areas of services, and it is going to be where we bring ideas to the table. We, become consultants to the world. We become educators to the world. We also become R&D. A lot of R&D is being done in India today, huge amounts. Many international companies have R&D centers in India. So all that requires free debate, free speech. That's where we score over China. So to my mind, it would be very important, both in our geopolitical, now that we have problems with our neighbor to the north, our alignments are going to be more sympathetic.
Does that mean you foresee some major changes in global alignments with India becoming much closer to Western powers?
I'm not saying we're going to become a standard bearer for the West. I don't think we want to be that. But we are going to be more sympathetic to the West because we see some democratic affinities with them. And I think given that, our natural growth going forward is going to be on the export of services, which we do really well, and providing services more, especially now that we can do services at a distance. Zoom, for example, is going to be very helpful in that. I think we should be focusing on creating a greater space for free speech, for debate, for enthusiastic back and forth, and not label anything that is critical of one stream of thought as, anti-national and not patriotic and, FIRs against journalists. This is not just bad for our country internally, but also looks very bad outside and makes us less central to the emerging coalitions that are going to be important in the world, certainly over the next 4 years.
Actually, in fact, the most wonderful thing about post-independent India compared to other developing countries has been our freedom of speech. And it's led to our young generation, youngsters like you, now with democracy in their very DNA. They question everything. I think they question too much, actually. But our great freedom has always made us feel so proud. It is the essence of India, isn't it?
It does. And, I mean, what sets the government on the right course is criticism. Constructive criticism by all means, but criticism is important because then you learn from your mistakes and you then straighten out. The government doesn't have information about everything that's going on. It acquires that information from the critics who say, look, this is getting problematic, that's a mess. And so we need a government that continues to welcome criticism. Again, yeah, it's good that the criticism should be constructive, but sometimes you can't control it. By all means, let it be. Let it, that was India. Could be India again. We need to work a little bit on making it happen.
So once again, since you're based at the heart of Western debate and opinion, is the world noticing some kind of change in India?
For sure. I mean, look, I read the most respectable newspapers here, the New York Times, the Economist, Financial Times. Of course, there's a tendency in India sometimes to dismiss it. These are biased. These don't. I mean, it's hard to argue that Democrats are biased against India. Democrats, cherish India. And the New York Times is largely a Democratic paper. But for the New York Times to start sort of having article after, now again, you can argue newspapers look at the dark side. They don't look at the, wonderful positive side. And there's a lot that's positive in India happening. But my sense is we should understand that the mood in the rest of the world towards India is darkening. That the freedoms the kind of countries that India is sometimes compared with on the democratic front are not countries we want to be clubbed with. India is better than this. And therefore, we can say it's all about public image. We need to but it's not just public image. It's also that we need to fix the reality. I saw an interview by Hamid Ansari, our former vice president, just yesterday. He's a serious Indian who has concerns, and we should, understand that this is something that matters to our people and matters to our future. We need to fix it.
And Kaushik, you've spoken about concerns in the Indian economy even before the crisis induced by the pandemic. In fact, Arvind Subramanian, India's former chief economic advisor, then at Harvard, now returning to India with the Ashoka University, has presented a series of charts on the pre-pandemic slowdown of the Indian economy. He suggests that the slowdown in India actually began 10 years ago. Let's quickly run through Arvind Subramanian's brilliant findings. Take India's exports for a start. Our export growth is plummeting from 16% and 24% now down to a very worrying 3%. All this is pre-pandemic. Also, our imports fell from a 15% growth rate in the Vajpayee government era now down to 4%. Again, this sort of sharp decline happened before the 2020 pandemic. Industry and government infrastructure investment has also dropped to the lowest levels of only 2 to 3% growth per year. So the downward trend began before the pandemic. We can't just say the pandemic crisis was the reason for our problems. And even credit and bank loans show the same decline well before the pandemic and have fallen to its lowest level for decades, down to just 4 to 6%. So we're bringing all these figures out to show that there was, as you have written, a deepening crisis before the pandemic. So Kaushik, while the pandemic intensified the crisis, exacerbated, the understandable collapse of our economy happened because of the pandemic. But the real concern is that there was a slowdown in the Indian economy in the kind of decade before the pandemic. So what caused the slowdown in the Indian economy? What caused the slowdown before the pandemic?
What is causing it? I'm not 100% sure. But there are writings, political economists, political scientists writing, sociologists writing, simple things in life like trust matters a lot. Everyday life, everything is not written down as a contract. 1,000 things we are doing by trust. Once trust begins to erode in society, society gets polarized, not trusting one another, the economic indicators begin to do badly. Francis Fukuyama is the classic work, which points to East Asia's success, because not just economic variables, but East Asia is picking up trust of the kind that you get in Nordic and Scandinavian countries. This is there in East Asia. India, starting from I don't know when, the trust was probably improving.
So Kaushik, are you saying that trust and non-economic issues like that, social issues, do have a direct impact on growth rates and poverty levels?
India has invested a lot, some will say too prematurely, in building a country where you feel a common identity just by virtue of being in the country. That was the common identity. That is getting eroded. And I cannot be completely sure about this, but I'm completely sure that the growth has crashed in a way that no one had expected. There has to be causes for that. And my feeling is the politics has become so divisive. And here I'm not putting blame. Immediately nowadays in public debates, you think that the blame is at this person's door or that person's door. I'm not doing that. But we have to recognize that it has become a very divisive politics. And that is probably what is adding to the mismanagement of the economy. There are a couple of things which were pure, simple mistakes and mismanagements. For instance, the demonetization was a very bad economic move. The lockdown, the way it was done, which left somewhere between 15 to 40 million people, actually from 23 million to 40 million people, I know the data, scattered over the country, doing exactly the opposite of a lockdown because they had to find food and survival. Those mismanagements did contribute. But you can correct them. Mistakes happen, you can begin to correct them. The political divisiveness, when trust goes down in society, much harder to correct. I feel we should bring that on the agenda. And we have to reach out to people, that it's in your collective interest to stand together. Too little of that happening right now.
And I just wanted to ask you one more thing. The world is changing. You're in America at the moment. You understand firsthand what's happening. There's been this huge change in America with Biden coming in, and there's talk about, we just said, the Coalition of Democracies, by which some imply that China is on one side and democracy is on the other. And that is actually really important for India, right? As you just said, India was proud of being a democratic country where you could say anything, you could argue, and freedom matters in India. Do you feel that's changing? And in the new kind of post-Trump world where being a true democracy could carry a premium now, a benefit in the Biden more democratic world. So in the democratic world, is there going to be a kind of face-off, a division with democracies and the non-democratic world? And should India be aware of this, and should we be happy about it, and will that affect us in any way?
Very much so, because on this, we truly took pride in India. You know, India, the time when India became independent, around that 1 or 2 decades, whole host of countries became independent at that time. Colonialism was breaking off. But if you see, there's only one country with a record that became independent then and remained a democracy with complete free speech is India. There's been hardly any interruption. There was an interruption during the emergency, 1975 to 1977, a 2-year interruption. But basically, India's been a vibrant democracy. You stand up and criticize. And I know that even at G20 meetings, when I used to go, people would say that it is an amazing, in our sort of corridor discussions, people would show a lot of respect to India, that you can speak. India is like a rich, developed country in terms of that space. And we were also beginning to grow. So India's investment in that freedom of space for debate and discussion, the democracy which was vibrant, which makes growth difficult, but it puts growth on a stronger footing. And India had begun to grow. So it was an amazing journey for the country. And maybe at times I feel we took too much pride in that is beginning to, India is eroding on that. I hope we will wake up.
So are there signs of a global trend of democratic values and norms being eroded?
I mean, United States is a good example of a country. Today, we are again feeling very buoyant about United States, that there is a recognition that in US was beginning to turn, but it's turned back. With that, one hopes that this is a signal going out around the world that to do well in the long run, you need the soft power of democracy, which India had the soft power. Pranay, I'm maybe digressing a bit. Once I remember in China, I had gone as an academic years ago. A journalist came to interview on economic matters and asked me that, can you tell me, Professor Basu, what's the secret of a soft power? And there was almost an element of envy in the voice that India epitomized soft power, which is a lot of power. It's soft power, and that is getting eroded. And it is in our self-interest, collective self-interest, to make sure that that does not erode. And the world, with the United States having turned around a very dangerous corner, hopefully there is a bit of a global rise in this sentiment that democracy is important.
Paul Milgrom, may I ask you a slightly political question? How does America avoid another Trump-like era? You don't have to answer that, but it is worrying for all of us across the world because America has never seemed to be so polarized as it is now. We admired America, and then we were shocked when the people of America voted in a politician like Trump. Now where hatred works. And so the rest of the world is concerned that this could happen to America again. Can the polarization in America get even worse than now, or is it going to improve?
I'm worried too. I think, by the way, this gets back to technology too. I mean, you know, the Trump phenomenon is partly about Twitter, and it's partly about the lack of any single trusted source. Trump has been lying for years and riling up his base with falsehoods and teaching hatred. And we don't have, you know, when I was growing up, we had Walter Cronkite. You know, there was this authoritative newsman who everybody believed and that told the truth. And now there's nobody we believe, and anybody can put out anything. And Trump was spreading all this stuff on Twitter. I think to bring the country together again, we really have to find a way to have somebody who's trusted and a way to clamp down on lies and falsehoods and hatred, which tear people apart and create this polarization. But I don't know how we're going to do that.